30 years ago, a set of triplets vanished without a trace right in front of 18 Willow Creek Road. No screams, no clues, only a lingering silence, as if time had swallowed all sound. The case went cold, the house was abandoned, and the entire town was forced to forget. But then, a sealed attic was discovered. A broken doll, a necklace engraved with a name, an old photograph. And from there, memories began to stir. The children thought lost had never really left. Willow Creek was a quiet street, shaded by red maples and ancient eucalyptus trees, where autumn arrived not just with the color of the leaves, but with the crisp sound under every footstep. Number 18 was nestled between Victorian-style houses, peeling paint and desolate, as if time had left it behind. Emily Harper stepped out of the car, raising a hand to shield her eyes from the faint afternoon sun, her gaze fixed on the leaning wooden fence. Beside her, Jake, her husband with messy hair and an old flannel shirt, took a deep breath. Well, it has potential. Inside, the house was like a faded film, creaking wooden floors, peeling wallpaper, and a musty smell mixed with something strangely sweet. "Old lavender," Emily said softly, not understanding how she recognized it. The first night passed uneventfully. Emily woke up at 2 a.m., unsure if it was the sound of footsteps on the floor above or the wind whistling through the cracks in the window. She sat up listening, but there was nothing. But the old swing set outside in the garden, which they hadn't touched, swayed in the darkness, even though the air was perfectly still. Jake dismissed her worries with his usual logic. Drafts, mice in the ceiling, or just your imagination. But on the fourth day, when Jake decided to tear down the attic wall to expand the space, something truly strange happened. The last hammer blow broke off a piece of brick wall, revealing a rectangular dark space, a small room, without doors or windows, completely sealed. Both of them stood still. "Why would there be a room here?" Jake mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Emily grabbed a flashlight, her heart pounding. The room was only about 6 square meters with a low ceiling and walls still covered in childish cloud-patterned wallpaper. In the middle of the room was an old wooden chest, covered in dust. Jake pried open the chest. Inside was a plastic doll, one eye gouged out, its hair tangled. A small silver necklace sparkled, with the name Lily engraved on the front, and a faded Polaroid. 3 girls wearing identical floral dresses, standing in front of this very house. Each child had a smile that seemed to stop midway, as if they had just been called when the camera clicked. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the photo. Her hand trembled in the dim light, and did she just hear children's laughter echoing from somewhere in the ceiling? That night, she lay awake. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, Emily searched for Willow Creek Missing Children. An old news report from 1993 appeared. Triplets, Lily, Hazel, and Rose Whitaker, disappear without a trace while playing in front of 18 Willow Creek Road. No one was charged, no clues. The house was then abandoned. Emily shuddered, her heart clenched. The children in the photo were the 3 missing girls, and that chest. Who put it in the sealed room? Who sealed the whole room? Why? Jake still tried to be rational. Maybe they were heirlooms of the former owner, stored and forgotten. But Emily didn't believe it. Something was wrong. Something was still lingering here. The next morning, she called the local sheriff's office. The woman on the other end of the line hesitated when she heard the address. I'll send someone over. You just keep everything as it is, okay?" Emily put down the phone. From the second-floor window, she saw the swing set still gently swaying in the morning sun, as if someone had just left their seat just a moment before. The police arrived at noon. Just a young officer was sent to record the scene. He took some photos of the wooden chest and the small room in the attic, recording information from Emily, but his expression seemed reluctant. When Emily presented the Polaroid photo, he hesitated, then bowed his head and whispered, "You can go to the town library. Ask Mrs. Finch, the librarian there. She knows more old stories than I've ever read in the files." "What do you mean? What kind of stories?" Emily asked, her eyes fixed on the lily necklace. "People still say something never left that house. But if you want to know the truth, you have to start with the last person who saw those 3 girls alive." The next morning, Emily sat by the window of a small cafe at the end of the street, clutching a lukewarm latte, her eyes following the rusty iron gates of the town library. "What are we doing?" Jake asked, not quite doubting, just weary. "We're reconnecting a broken thread," Emily replied, her eyes fixed on the gate. Someone tied a knot too cleverly. The library was housed in an old brick building with hints of architecture from the last century. The librarian, Lois Brenner, was a neatly combed silver-haired woman, her hand always placed on the cover of a book as if caressing a living thing. "Whitaker, you say?" She repeated the name with slightly cloudy eyes. "That no one wants to talk about." Emily opened her bag, taking out the Polaroid. The 3 children stood smiling, their floral dresses fluttering, but their eyes seemed to contain an unformed fear. Lois looked at the photo for a long time, her lips pursed as if about to read an ancient prayer. "I remember clearly that summer. The whole town was in an uproar because of the disappearance of the 3 children." She lowered her voice. "Margaret, their mother, used to come to this library every Thursday afternoon. She would often borrow children's books, then sit for hours in the corner, reading softly to the 3 girls." Lois paused, looking up. "But after they disappeared, Margaret never came back." Emily hesitated. "Do you remember anything unusual happening at that time?" Lois nodded slightly, as if struggling internally for a long time before admitting, "Some nights I saw a woman standing outside the fence of number 18. Emily tightened the photo in her hand. "You said someone used to stand looking at the house?" Lois nodded softly, her eyes as if looking through the years. "I've worked at this library for 30 years. I also lived near Willow Creek for a while. On rainy nights I saw that woman, just standing there, looking up at the second-floor window." Emily breathed softly, almost afraid to break the silence. "Do you know who she was?" Lois hesitated, then reached out and opened an old wooden cabinet under the counter, taking out a faded notebook. After flipping through a few pages, she handed Emily a small piece of paper with shaky handwriting. "Margaret Whitaker, 42 Birch Lane. She used to borrow an old book about child custody laws. The last time I saw her was 4 years ago." Lois looked up, her voice slow. "If you find her, be gentle, because she lost more than anyone I've ever known." Jake's old car slowly climbed the slope into the outskirts of town, where the roads were deserted and the houses receded behind rows of trees. They stopped in front of the faded wooden house, number 42 Birch Lane, where Margaret Whitaker lived. The door opened after 3 gentle knocks. A gaunt woman, white hair, sunken eyes, stood there. She looked at the 3 strangers without blinking. Emily gently held out the Polaroid. Margaret didn't rush to take it. She just looked, her eyes frozen between 2 times. One hand trembled slightly, clutching the edge of her old coat. The whole space seemed to hold its breath. "This photo, where did you get it?" Her voice was hoarse, weak, but each word was heavy as stone. "We found it in the attic of 18 Willow Creek Road," Emily said, as softly as reporting something just dug up from the earth. After a long silence, Margaret reached out, touching the edge of the photo as if touching something that had once been her flesh and blood. "They," she swallowed, her eyes fixed on the photo, "used to stand like that, but I'm not sure. I've forgotten how long ago. I just remember the air smelled of freshly cut grass that day." She retreated, saying nothing more, just leaving the door open, an invitation that needed no words. Emily was about to say something, but the words caught in her throat. For a moment, time had no meaning. Only the mother's eyes, weary, containing 1,000 sleepless nights, were following each of her children's faces from a faded photograph. Jake quietly sat down on an old chair by the extinguished fireplace. We found the photo and some items in the sealed room in the attic. Margaret shook her head, her hands trembling as she touched the wooden beads hanging in front of her chest. I didn't know it had been sealed. I thought, someone did it after I left. I never dared to go up to that floor after that night. The room suddenly seemed colder. Emily asked softly, "That night, what happened, Mrs. Margaret?" I only took my eyes off them for 10 minutes. Her voice broke like rotten wood in the rain. They were playing in the yard. I heard them laughing. Then suddenly it stopped. No screams, no footsteps, only the sound of the wind. When I ran out, the yard was empty. The gate was still locked. It was as if my 3 children had evaporated from this world. Emily looked at her, not asking anything more. The dense silence between the 3 people was like a blanket covering a pain that had never been stitched up. The police said I was confused. They said maybe I did something, lost control, but they didn't understand. I wasn't the perfect mother, but I loved them with everything I had. She stood up, walking slowly to the window. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop like a knock on lost time. I believe my 3 daughters are still out there somewhere, Margaret said, almost breathless, and I still hear them calling on rainy nights. Emily stepped forward, placing her hand on her shoulder. For a moment, 2 women, one young, one near the end of her days, stood side by side in an empathy that needed no explanation. Jake spoke after a long moment. We don't have many abilities, but if there's anything we can do to find out the truth, then we will. Margaret didn't turn around. She just nodded, a nod that was faint, light as a breath. But in that nod was a mountain of years that had passed, a hope buried from 30 years ago, just revealing its first glimmer of light. In an empty room on the 3rd floor of the old town hall, Ava Bell reopened the file of the Whitaker missing persons case for the first time. She was from the State Department of Justice, specializing in unsolved missing children cases. Experienced, sharp, and particularly sensitive to small details that others often overlooked. Emily and Jake had given her everything they found, from the photo to the necklace, and the fragmented notes that Margaret still kept in a rusty tin box. I want the names of everyone who lived in that house from 1990 to 1994, Ava told the local police secretary as they sat together under the pale yellow fluorescent lights. One name immediately appeared on the list: Caleb Knox. Born in 1954. Declared occupation: independent pastor. He came to town in 1992, Sheriff Shaw recounted as they sat in the cafe opposite the lake. Rented the downstairs of the Whitaker house. Sideburns, deep voice, spoke like reading the Bible. Everyone thought he was a little eccentric, but harmless. Did anyone ever complain? Ava asked, her eyes fixed on the notebook. Shaw exhaled. Once, Margaret said he liked to sit and play with the 3 children for hours, but at the time, no one thought anything of it. Through the state archive system, Ava found another lead, a place called New Haven's Children, not a licensed facility, but an informal fostering community in the mountains of northern Oregon. The founder and operator, Caleb Knox. The camp was closed in 2006, Ava said, as the group reviewed the documents in the police office. Investigated for inhumane living conditions, no electricity, no clean water, children forced to learn doctrine from dawn until midnight. Do any of those children match the 3 Whitaker girls? Emily asked. Ava shook her head, flipping through the old yellowed stack of papers. The residency list of Haven's Edge is very sketchy. They didn't use their real names. All the children were renamed, according to the Bible or according to virtues, Faith, hope, grace, Ruth, joy. Jake frowned. It sounds like names within an isolated religious community. Emily leaned over Ava's shoulder. Faith, hope, and grace. The same age, same residency date. Mrs. Margaret whispered quietly. Born on October 14th. Ava looked up, her eyes flashing with suspicion. If it's a coincidence, it's too strange. Jake swallowed hard. Could it be? Emily placed her hand on the old photo, her voice soft as if speaking to herself. If they were renamed and separated, then the three of them might still be alive. No one said anything more. That question hung in the air like a taut string. No confirmation, but for the first time, hope flickered. They returned to Margaret's house. When Ava mentioned Caleb Knox's name, she wasn't surprised, just contemplative, like someone who had just received confirmation of a suspicion that had been hidden for decades. He used to sit with the children on the porch, Margaret said slowly, her eyes looking into the distance, teaching them to read the Bible, or telling stories about a place with no suffering, where children were kept from the dust of the world. Did you ever suspect anything? Jake asked softly. I thought he was a good person, she whispered. I thought God sent him. The room was silent after that statement. No one dared to touch the void that was opening up in front of them, the void of a belief that had once been very real, now only a dry cut. Ava sat silently for a long time after that meeting. In the car, as it began to rain, she flipped through the old file again. Something didn't fit. The years Pastor Caleb lived at the Whitaker house, the times he withdrew from the community for health, and the disappearance coincided with the time Haven's Edge camp was closed. That night, she sent a request to access the county archives, where undigitized records were stored. A week later, while reviewing records of assets seized from people who had lived at 18 Willow Creek, Ava discovered a strange detail. Among the documents from an abandoned house in the mountains to the north, believed to be Caleb Knox's former residence, was a leather-bound notebook, unlabeled, forgotten in a box of unclassified assets. The notebook had no name, no address. But when Ava flipped to the first page, she knew she had found the right thing. The handwriting was wobbly, but clearly that of a man. June 17th. 3 flowers cannot grow among weeds. If we do not pick them, they will wither from the mud. Blessings must be nurtured where the soul is unblemished. Emily read that line aloud. No one spoke for a long time. This is his diary? Margaret asked, her lips trembling slightly. Not verified, Ava replied. But the handwriting matches perfectly with the handwriting in the children's files at Haven's Edge. And this passage is enough to know he was more than just a tenant. Ava sat on the floor of the archive, slowly turning each page of the faded leather-bound notebook. In the margins of some pages were wobbly lines, sometimes Bible quotes, sometimes fragmented monologues about purification and new light. Then she stopped on the penultimate page. A small piece of paper, folded into quarters, was clipped between 2 pages as if forgotten. When opened, she realized it was a topographical map, the kind used by hikers. On the corner of the paper was a faint pencil mark, circling an area deep in the mountains of northern Oregon. Next to the line was a line that was almost impossible to read. Haven's Edge, where quiet begins. Ava froze. Her heart beat fast, not with fear, but with something like the footsteps of truth approaching. The road leading into the mountains of northern Oregon seemed to turn into another world. Jake was driving, his shoulders stiff as the wheels climbed over the deep, winding potholes. Behind him, Margaret silently hugged her bag, her eyes looking aimlessly through the foggy window. Emily sat next to Ava in the middle row, the old map spread on her lap. According to the documents, the camp was near Coldwater Creek. The land was once registered under the name of an unorthodox religious sect, now no longer present on the digital map. After 3 hours, they arrived. Before them was a forgotten land, nestled between two bald hills. A leaning wooden gate with the scorched words "Haven's Edge" was like a promise swallowed by the loneliness of this place. Emily shuddered as she entered the wasteland. The wind blowing through the crumbling walls created a groaning sound, like children whispering in their sleep. The small chapel in the center was only a skeleton, the torn corrugated iron roof flapping in the wind, the wooden walls partially burned, revealing an upside-down sign, "Purification begins with silence." Behind it was a row of low brick houses, whitewashed, now green with mold and rotten, once the children's living quarters. An old man appeared from the bushes, holding a shovel, his shoulders covered with a worn fur coat. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice hoarse as sand. Ava stepped forward, holding out her police badge. "We need information. You're Amos Garland, right? The one who used to be a guard at this camp?" Amos looked at the badge for a long time, then nodded slightly. "I was only here for the last few years, after Caleb disappeared." "What brings you people here?" Margaret stepped forward. "I'm looking for my daughters. They were triplets." Amos looked up, and in his eyes, for the first time, there was no longer wariness, but regret. "I remember the three little ones. Thin, curly brown hair, strangely similar, but their names were not to be known. They were renamed. No one was allowed to ask where they came from. No one was allowed to know who their mother was." "Were they recorded in the files?" Ava asked, her voice tense. "Yes, in the basement of the chapel," Amos replied, then pointed to the stained concrete floor. Under the thick layer of dust and broken bricks, they found a staircase leading down to a half-submerged basement, the door locked with rusty iron chains. Jake cut the chains, pushing the heavy wooden door open with a groan. The smell of dampness and rotten wood rushed up like a handful of sighing ashes. In the basement was a series of old wooden filing cabinets. Ava and Emily wore gloves, opening each drawer. "Here," Ava pulled out a set of documents. "List of children, according to Virtue Group." Emily frowned. "Faith, Hope, Grace ... Right age. Entered the camp in the summer of 1993. No surname, no guardian." Margaret sat down on a broken-legged chair, trembling as she held the paper with the three names. Were these the names they used here? No longer Lily, Hazel, Rose. Ava looked closely at the writing on the corner of the file. The handwriting was deep, slanted, familiar. She flipped through Caleb Knox's old notebook to compare. Exactly the same. He wrote this list himself. Outside, the wind began to pick up. On the stained ground, Margaret walked slowly to the row of bedrooms. The rotten wooden door popped open under her hand. Inside were just a few rusty iron bed frames, a few tattered blankets, and a faded charcoal drawing on the wall. Three girls holding hands under a distorted sun. "They used to sleep here," Margaret whispered. "Under this rusty corrugated iron roof, in the cold and fear." Jake stood still, his hand gently placed on her shoulder. Emily turned away, her eyes red. Ava came out of the basement, carrying all the files. "We need to go. This place is just a testimony. They, if they're still alive, haven't been here for a long time." Margaret didn't move. She pulled a small silk scarf from her pocket, placing it on the oldest iron bed frame. "Even if there's nothing left, I still want to leave something for my children." No one said anything during the return journey, but in everyone's heart, something had changed, from vague speculation to certainty. 3 little girls had been stolen from 18 Willow Creek Road, and their footprints, though covered in dust by time, had never disappeared from this world. Back at the house, Ava put down her coffee cup, gently pushing a stack of newly photocopied documents in front of the group. "I got some internal medical records from Haven's Edge, the kind that weren't digitized, almost forgotten." She pulled out an old form, the edge of the paper yellowed, but the writing still clear. Special nursing request, Sister Nadine Caraway. Reason, mental breakdown, long-term care recommended. Date, March 2011, Ava said, right after the community broke up. And here, she pointed to the last line. Reception location, Morning Pines Residence, Idaho. Emily looked down, breathing softly. She used to be there? Ava nodded. There are no updated records after that, but if she's still alive, that's the first place to go. Idaho was shrouded in drizzle as the rental car stopped in front of Maple Hollow Nursing Home, a small stone building surrounded by an old lavender garden. Emily held Margaret's hand. Sister Nadine is waiting, the young nurse said softly. She doesn't talk much, but today, she's more alert than usual. Sister Nadine sat by the window in her private room, her eyes looking far away at the rain falling through the trees. Her silver hair was neatly braided, her hand holding an old handkerchief with a frayed lace edge. Ava stepped forward, gently placing the old Polaroid on the coffee table. She didn't react immediately. Then, after a breath, her eyes stopped, glued to the photo as if she had just seen 3 spirits she thought had vanished into memory. Her thin hands trembled, her lips opened and pursed, and only one tear rolled down. Lily, Hazel, Rose, she murmured. Oh God, I used to lull you to sleep. I used to sing you lullabies. Emily sat down next to her. You know these 3 children? Not just know them, Nadine said, her eyes fixed on the photo. I loved them. Ava turned on the recorder but didn't interrupt. At this moment, the elderly woman was no longer a nursing home resident. She was the door to a buried memory, and everyone knew it had to be allowed to open on its own. They came to Haven's Edge when they were 5 years old. No crying, no questions, just holding hands all the time. I was assigned to take care of them because they slept in the same room, Nadine recounted, her voice breaking into fragments. They were called Faith, Hope, and Grace. No one told them they were triplets? Nadine shook her head, her eyes hardening. Not aloud. Caleb said, family is the root of suffering. He believed that if they were separated, erasing the memories of blood ties, their souls would be purer. Margaret squeezed Emily's hand. How could someone think of something so evil? He gave each child a separate background. One was the daughter of a nurse who died early. One was from a forest fire camp. One was brought by the hand of fate, Nadine said by rote. After the age of 10, they were assigned roles. One went to study painting, one was sent to a charity in New Mexico, one stayed to teach the new children. Did they contact each other? Ava asked. Never, she shook her head softly. No letters, no photos, no permission to mention the names of the past. I used to secretly let them play together for a few hours each week. But since they were separated, not anymore. Emily choked. And so they never knew they were sisters? Nadine's eyes were red. Number. And that's what hurt me the most. A moment later, Nadine stood up slowly, walking to an old drawer. She took out a student notebook, the cover torn, the paper yellowed. She placed it in Margaret's hand. I've kept it for 30 years. Not for any value, but because this is the only proof I have left that you used to belong to each other. Inside were pencil drawings, childish, innocent strokes. One took up the entire first page. 3 girls wearing the same dresses, hand in front of an iron gate with the shaky words, "Family is where we are kept together." Margaret burst into tears, unable to hold back. She trembled as she pressed her hand on the drawing, as if feeling the warmth from the palms of the children of years past. Ava gently collected a saliva sample from Nadine, quietly saying, "We will check the DNA and compare the records. You can help us prove it." Nadine nodded. "I have nothing to lose, but if there is hope, please let me see them before I die." Emily took her hand. If they're still alive, we'll bring them back." Then Mrs. Nadine took a deep breath, her eyes closed as if searching for a distant memory. "I used to see it," she whispered. A brown notebook swayed, very old, recording all the children who were assigned. "Reassigned?" Emily asked. "After the age of 10, Mrs. Nadine nodded. "They didn't let them stay together anymore. Each had a new name, assigned to a family in the community. Some were later sent elsewhere. That notebook recorded everything." Ava sat up straight. "Do you know where the notebook is now?" "I'm not sure. But I remember they had someone pack the papers in boxes and send them to the state welfare agency in Eugene. I used to hear the old men talking. Give it all away, as long as we save our own skins." When they left the nursing home, the rain had stopped. On the ground were still puddles reflecting the light of the setting sun. Jake said nothing as he drove. Margaret hugged the student notebook close to her chest, as if afraid someone would steal it. As for Emily, her eyes were fixed on the distant rows of trees. "Those 3 children," she said softly, "may not remember each other, but memories, though buried, still wait for the day to be awakened." 3 days later, Ava stood in front of a low, moss-covered warehouse at the end of an old industrial road on the outskirts of Eugene. Above the iron door was a rusty sign: "Social Welfare, Temporary Storage, Closed 2013. She was allowed inside with a special letter of introduction. The person in charge, an old silver-haired man named Vernon, shook his head slightly when he heard Ava ask about the Haven's Edge file. "That place was very strange," he said. "They sent back a whole truckload of documents. No labels, no handling instructions. We left it as it was in the corner in the back." Ava followed him through the cold aisle, the smell of old paper and mold rising heavily. At the end of the hall were 5 cardboard boxes, so old that they were almost falling apart. On one box, the handwritten words in red ink were still faint: "Internal Transfer, TCN 2003 to 2010. She sat down, put on gloves, and flipped through each layer of paperwork. More than an hour later she found it, a brown leather notebook, loose spine, covered in dust. On the cover was a scrawled handwritten line: "Student Redistribution List, Haven's Edge." She opened it, and on page 17, Faith Laramie, Seattle, Washington Hope Miller, Helena, Montana Grace Cardenas, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Date of redesignation, April 15, 2001. Temporary guardianship, external transfer, humanitarian purpose. Ava held the notebook, frozen. She pulled out her phone, calling Margaret. Her voice was low, trembling slightly with emotion. "I have the addresses. All 3 of them. They're still out there somewhere." The youth center in Helena, Montana, nestled behind a row of old pines, was where unacknowledged children, rebels, survivors of violence, found something like peace. And standing in the middle of the space full of paintings was a woman named Hope Miller. She often squatted down to talk to children, gently tucking their hair behind their ears, her eyes squinting every time she smiled. People loved Hope for her calmness, for the way she listened without rushing, as if she had heard a lot of silence before and knew what that silence said. Ava Bell entered the youth center in Helena, Montana, carrying a small leather bag and a polite smile. In the small meeting room lined with green carpet, Hope Miller was waiting, a woman in her early 30s, with a gentle figure, her brown hair tied neatly, her face alert but reserved. "I'm Ava," the woman said, holding out her hand. "I'm working on a federal project about young adults who grew up in segregated fostering conditions. Religious communities, spontaneous children's camps, private fostering systems." Hope shook her hand, nodding slightly. "I'm not sure my story helps much, but I understand that topic." Ava sat down, not turning on the recorder, just taking out a pen and a notebook. "Where did you grow up?" Ava asked, her voice as light as asking about the weather. Hope hesitated for a beat, then spoke slowly. "A place called Haven's Edge, no specific address." No phone, no school. We were taught the Bible, gardening, and not allowed to ask about the outside world. Ava tilted her head slightly, not interrupting. Hope looked out the window. I only had official papers after I was 12 years old. Before that, I didn't even know when my birthday was. Ava nodded, opening her notebook. Have you ever dreamed about something you couldn't explain? Images, feelings that didn't seem to belong to your own memory? Hope laughed, but her eyes were confused. I often dream of two little girls, wearing the same floral dresses. They're always holding hands walking in the forest, never saying anything. I don't know why, but I always stand a distance away from them, as if I know I should go with them, but I'm not allowed to. Ava looked at her, then slowly placed the Polaroid on the table. Hope looked at it. At first it was curiosity, then silence. Her hand unconsciously reached out, gently touching the face in the photo, then up to the necklace on her shirt collar, where the pink stone sparkled slightly. She didn't realize she had made that move. That pendant, how long have you had it? Ava asked, as casually as talking about the weather. Hope whispered, I don't know. It was around my neck when I arrived at the relief center in Billings at the age of 12. They said it was the only thing that came with me. I've never taken it off. Ava opened another file, flipping through a copy of a birth certificate that had been blurred by hand. Name, Hope Miller. Born on April 14, 1993. Do you know that there were two other children, born on the same day as you, who disappeared in Oregon in 1993? Hope gently pulled her chair back, as if pushed by an invisible force. She stared at the photo again. That's me. But why are there two people who look so much like me? The question burst out, simple, confused, and in an instant, the whole world Hope knew began to crack into pieces. After taking a DNA sample from Hope, Ava called Margaret, Emily, and Jake into the hallway. I need 2 days to compare it with the original sample from Mrs. Margaret, but I'm sure this is Hazel. Margaret didn't cry. She just put both hands on her chest, as if trying to keep her heart from jumping out of her ribcage. She's alive. Emily looked through the window. Hope was sitting by the window, her face buried in her hands. The light from outside shone in, making her curly brown hair shine like a halo that had been asleep. Does she know? Margaret asked. No, Ava replied, but her body still remembers. The subconscious always knows. 2 days later, the official results came in. Hope Miller was Hazel Whitaker. Ava handed the results in a sealed envelope to Hope. She was silent for a long time after reading. Her eyes were blank, her hand clutching the envelope as if trying to melt it so that it no longer existed. Sisters, she said. I have triplet sisters. I used to be part of something bigger. Then why don't I remember anything? Margaret stepped in. No one introduced, no need. Hope looked up. Mrs. Margaret approached, sitting down opposite her. Her old hands trembled as they touched the young girl's cheek, then slowly placed in her palm, like someone returning a lost piece of their soul. Your name is Hazel, Margaret whispered. You liked red maple trees. You used to have a stuffed bunny named Poppy. Hope burst into tears. Not violently, just tears flowing silently, like a small stream finding its way back after being blocked for years. I don't remember, she said in tears. But I feel it's right. I always felt like I had forgotten something that had been very important. That day, Hope resigned from her job at the center. She took a walk with Emily by the lake. The lake was calm, reflecting the swaying trees like memories just awakened. I don't know who I am, Hope said, but I want to know. Emily smiled gently. Then come with us. There are 2 more people waiting to be recognized. Hope looked into the distance, as if seeing something beyond sight. I used to see them in my dreams, she whispered. Now I want to meet them for real. That afternoon, as the sunlight faded through the window of a small inn, Margaret laid her head on Hope's shoulder, her arms tightly embracing the photo of her 3 daughters. She hadn't eaten anything since morning. Her breath was short and her eyes were beginning to cloud over. Ava bent down to take her temperature, frowning. "She has a slight fever. It seems her blood pressure is dropping. We need to take her to the hospital for a checkup." Margaret forced a smile. "I'm fine. I still have to go with you, find my daughters." But her hand trembled visibly as she grabbed her handbag. Jake looked at Ava, then at Emily. Everyone was silent, reluctant to say it, but in their hearts they all understood. Margaret couldn't continue the journey. And at that moment, Hope stepped in. She knelt down by the bed, holding her mother's hand. Her voice was gentle, but full of determination. "You've gone a longer distance than anyone else. Enough, Mom. Now, it's my turn to go and find my sisters." Margaret looked at her. In those eyes, she suddenly saw Hazel at the age of 8, standing in front of the house with her hair tied in a ponytail. She nodded slightly, a tear falling on Hope's hand, not because of regret, but because she knew she was finally no longer alone in the journey to find her stolen children. Seattle in June brought a light rain like silk. Emily and Hope stood in front of a small gallery tucked away in the Fremont Art District, the old brick walls covered with ivy, the metal nameplate attached crookedly. Faith Laramie, Dreams and Relics. Inside was a quiet, calm space, the smell of oil paint mixed with the sound of classical music playing softly. On the walls hung a series of large paintings, cold colors, vague shapes, shaky lines as if someone were redrawing dreams from broken memories. One near the entrance made Emily stop. 3 little girls, hand in hand, stood under a window. Floral dresses, slightly disheveled hair, eyes turned towards a place no one knew. Hope walked over, her heart pounding. "These are the images in my dreams." A voice rang out behind them. "I paint from dreams. I don't know why that image keeps coming back." The woman was wearing a light gray sweater, slender, with deep eyes and pale skin. It was Faith Laramie, born in 1993, abstract artist, never appeared in the media. Her curly brown hair was pulled up behind her neck, and around her neck was a faded blue silk scarf. "You are?" Faith asked, her eyes glancing over Hope, then Emily. "We're from Oregon," Emily said slowly. "And this is Hazel, your sister." Faith didn't blink. She just tilted her head as if listening to an ancient language. "Hazel," she laughed softly. "My name is Faith. I don't have any sisters." Hope moved closer, but Faith took half a step back, her hand gently placed on the frame of the painting. "I don't know what you people are trying to say. I paint what I see, nothing more." "And what do you see?" Emily asked. Faith hesitated. Then, after a moment of silence, she said, "3 shadows. Always 3. One of them often stands far away from the other 2. Never holding hands." Ava appeared after 10 minutes, carrying a stack of documents, gently but decisively. "Ms. Laramie, I am a federal representative in charge of identity-modified records. In 2003, there was a name change application in Idaho from Lily Whitaker to Faith Laramie, protected by the Haven's Edge organization." Faith tightened the silk scarf around her neck, her face turning white. No, I've never." She turned away, but Hope stepped forward, gently pulling up her sleeve. A long, hook-shaped scar on her knee appeared. "Do you have this?" Hope asked, then lifted her skirt, where the same scar was located in the exact same position. Emily also lifted her jeans. The 3rd scar. Faith looked at them one by one, stunned, like a child seeing a game they imagined turn out to be real. Her eyes stopped at the painting. 3 little girls, the window, and the house. Ava held out the Polaroid. Faith startled. "I know this photo." Emily took her hand, as gently as holding a painting about to be blown away by the wind. "That's you. That's me. That's Hope. That's Lily, Hazel, Rose." An hour later, they sat together in the corner of a cafe next to the gallery. Faith didn't say much. She sipped her mint tea, her eyes looking out at the rain, as if words weren't enough to express the earthquake that was erupting in her heart. "No one ever told me," Faith whispered. "They told me I was a sacred gift, that my parents were misguided souls. I just remember being punished for drawing 3 shadows that looked the same." "I dreamed of you," Hope said, placing her hand gently on her hand. "I always saw you standing far away, saying nothing. I thought it was my fault." Faith turned to look at Hope. For the first time, those eyes really met. "Number. They separated me and made me forget." A silence flowed between the 3 people, but this time it didn't bring distance, but like a newly placed bridge. That evening, in a small bedroom behind the gallery, Faith opened an old chest containing sketches, paintings that had never been hung. One of them was 3 hands intertwined on a black background. At the bottom was a sheet of A5 paper with clumsy childish handwriting. "I am Lily. I like the wind. I have 2 sisters, but I don't remember their names." She placed her hand on that line, not crying, not trembling, just whispering softly, "Now I will remember." Amidst the scorching sun and dust of New Mexico, in a small relief center, a zinc dome, ceiling fans creaking, Grace Cardenas was giving bread to a barefoot child, her eyes glued to her hand as if it were magic. Grace Cardenas was sharing food with a little child in the slums when she heard a call behind her. "Excuse me, are you Grace, right?" She turned around. A brown-haired woman stepped forward, holding an old, faded Polaroid in her hand. We don't want to scare you," the other woman said quickly. "Just please, look at this photo for a moment." Grace looked down. The photo of 3 girls in floral dresses standing in front of a wooden house with a white flower trellis behind it. Her eyes froze. Her hand unconsciously reached up to her neck, touching the thin silver necklace. Her face didn't change, but her voice was almost hoarse. I've seen this photo before, but only in my dreams." Hope stepped forward. "I used to be called Rose, your youngest sister." Grace took half a step back, her heart pounding. She looked at Hope, then at Faith, as if facing 2 flickering shadows from the past. "I used to dream about 2 little girls who looked like me, one painting, one smiling very softly. I dreamed about it all my childhood, but I always thought it was just my imagination." Ava nodded slightly, opening her bag and taking out a file of documents. "We have guardianship records, test results, and your real name. Rose Whitaker. 30 years ago, you disappeared from Willow Creek with your 2 triplet sisters." The last sentence rang out like a sob. Grace didn't answer immediately. She just looked back at the photo, then at Hope. Those eyes were now tearful. She whispered, "I know. I always knew. I just didn't dare to believe it." The break room in the relief center became the site of a reunion that, for 3 decades, no one dared to believe was real. Hope took Grace's hand, gently turning her wrist, where a small comma-shaped scar was still faint. "The bike fall on the grassy hill behind the house," Hope said. "You scratched yourself, like me, and Faith too." Faith nodded, her eyes red. "Do you remember anything?" Grace nodded. "A little. I remember a song, mentioning Little Sun and Lavender Garden. I remember a scent every time I slept, maybe from Mom's scarf." Hope took out the old notebook that Nadine had left behind. She opened a page, giving it to Grace. "Family is where we are kept together." The handwriting was shaky, crooked, but heartbreakingly warm. Grace burst into tears, hugging her 2 sisters. No need for many words. Just 3 arms tightly embracing each other, as if wanting to make up for every lost winter night, every awakening in confusion, every question, "Where do I come from?" That never had an answer. That evening, Margaret arrived after recovering part of her health. Jake supported her through the dusty streets. Emily walked alongside, holding a tight grip on the old photo album. Grace saw her from afar, without anyone introducing her. Like a blood vessel finding its heart, she walked slowly into the middle of the yard, her eyes fixed on her face, and stopped just one step away. Margaret covered her mouth but couldn't stop the first sob. Her whole body seemed to shrink, small and fragile in her faded old sweater. Tears spilled out in disorder, not a burst of crying, but each drop falling slowly, deeply, as if each drop was a long year of waiting, of loss. She didn't groan, didn't scream, just bowed her head, her two old hands clenched together until they were white, trembling as if praying to someone, or asking forgiveness from herself. Her voice, when it came out, was hoarse like the sound of wind blowing through an old wall. I called their names, every night, for 30 years, yet still afraid that one day they would return, and I wouldn't be strong enough to recognize them. Grace rushed into her arms, laying her head on her shoulder like a child who had never grown up. The whole center was silent, only the sound of the wind gently swaying the corrugated iron roof. I still remember you, Mom, Grace whispered, even though they told me I was an abandoned child. Margaret held her daughter tightly, as if wanting to pull her entire lost life back with one breath. In the small room, the three sisters sat together under the dim light. Nadine's student notebook was spread on the ground, each one with one hand following the words of their own childhood. I am Hazel. I want to learn to swim and raise a cat. I am Lily. I dream of having a really big swing set. I am Rose. I like to sing and hate carrots. All three laughed through their tears. I never ate carrots after the age of 10, Grace said softly. I'm still afraid of deep water, Hope added. And I'm still looking for the right swing set, Faith smiled. Laughter broke out, simple, fragmented but contagious. No one mentioned the name Caleb Knox. No one asked about the sentence that never happened, or about the lost years. They just talked about the little things, whether the dress had lace or not, which glass of water had been spilled on the bed, which lullaby their mother used to sing in the winter. Ava stood outside the yard, her hands in her pockets, looking at the light from the porch, a light as warm as a candle burning in the palm of her hand. She didn't step in. She had completed her role. Justice, the justice of paperwork, sometimes doesn't catch the shadow that committed the crime. But the justice of kinship is different. It takes root in memory, blooms in forgiveness, and lives forever in reunion. Ava turned away, walking slowly down the old road. For the first time after many years of investigating disappearances, she didn't carry a file, nor did she close the case. Because this case didn't need to end with a sentence, but with a candlelight dinner, with 3 dolls smiling at those they once belonged to. Night fell. On the porch of 18 Willow Creek, 4 women sat together. 3 heads of hair now grown, 1 head of hair now silver. Each held a cup of tea, their eyes looking at the garden where 3 bushes of flowers gently swayed in the wind. They were no longer the stolen children. They were survivors. And more than anything, they were family. Spring arrived slowly but gently enough to soothe the rough edges of the years. On the grassy hill along Willow Creek Street, wild flowers bloomed leaning in the sun, soft as a whisper of memory, as if the land here had forgiven. Number 18 was no longer the old house, not only because of the new paint or the repaired porch, but because of the voices, the laughter, and the warm light that spread every late afternoon. The 3 sisters, now all living in the small town on the edge of the forest, didn't live in the same house, but were only a few blocks away. They still called each other every morning, still visited unexpectedly, still argued over the slightly salty soup, and still sat together every afternoon. Faith opened a small gallery right on the corner of the city center. Her first opening was given a name that could not be anything other than The Nameless Children. The exhibition space wasn't large, but the walls were filled with haunting strokes, the eyes of children without pupils, shadows in the misty forest, arms raised calling out to someone who never turned back. But in the middle of it all, in the center, was a large painting. 3 children in floral dresses, hand in hand, standing in front of an old house covered in light. Emily and Jake arrived, holding a new photo frame. Emily smiled as she opened the wrapping paper. "This is a work I didn't paint, but life painted for me." In the frame was a photo of 4 women sitting on the steps of the house, 3 daughters, 1 mother. No one was looking at the camera. All 4 were smiling at each other. The light from behind made their hair glow, everyone leaning slightly towards the person next to them, a position no one taught, only memory reminded them. Jake hung the photo in the quietest corner of the gallery, under the small words carved on the wood. Family is where people still recognize each other, even when they've forgotten their names. That afternoon, when the visitors had thinned out, Margaret told her 3 daughters to go with her to the backyard, where the 3 bushes of flowers had begun to bloom for the first time since they were planted. White lilies, purple hazelnuts, and bright red roses grew close together, weaving their petals under the afternoon sun. Margaret opened the folded paper in her sweater pocket. "Mom wants to read this. One last time." All 3 sat down quietly. Margaret slowly opened the paper. The handwriting was still shaky, but each word was clear as a prayer engraved deep in her heart. "My dear children, there are things that cannot be explained, like why we lose someone, or why darkness chooses the right house to stay in for 30 years. But there's one thing I believe, that if a mother continues to hear the sound of her child's footsteps in her dreams, then they haven't really left. I lost you, but the world, somehow, has given me back something more precious than anything: the return. I no longer complain. I just know how to bow my head and say thank you for being able to touch my daughter's hand one more time. And if one day I'm gone, remember, you are never lost. It's just a longer road to get home." No one spoke. Hope gently touched her mother's hand. Her eyes blurred, but her voice was still clear. "I used to think I didn't need to know the past, but now I know. The roots are what help us stand straight." Faith said softly, "And memories aren't meant to hurt us, but to keep us from forgetting how we survived." Grace smiled, her eyes still sparkling. "And I'll plant more flowers, so if a child who was ever lost comes to this place, they'll know that someone has returned." Late in the afternoon, they spread blankets on the grassy hill behind the house, where there used to be a children's playground. Now only the scent of earth remained. No one brought a phone. No one needed to take any more pictures. The 3 sisters lay close together, their heads leaning against each other as they did when they were little, their eyes closed. The afternoon sun poured gold on their eyelashes, soaked into their hair, as quiet as a touch of a memory that had been forgiven. No one said anything, but in everyone's heart was the same thing. We have been returned, not intact, but enough to continue. Margaret watched from afar, her hand holding a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on her 3 daughters who had once been stolen. And now, in the last light of the day, she knew one thing: they were no longer stolen children. They were the ones who found each other again. And from today, no one will be forgotten. Have you ever felt helpless in the face of a buried truth? Not because you don't want to know, but because you're afraid of what you'll have to face? If you've read to the last lines of this story, perhaps in your heart, there has also been a person, a memory, or a wound that no one believes is real. The story of the Whitaker sisters is not just a missing persons case. It is a call from memory, a witness to things that seem to have been buried by time. We wrote this story from real inspiration, from forgotten files, from people who have quietly survived things that no one has bothered to listen to. The names and locations have been fictionalized, but the pain, the hope, and the journey to find each other are real. If you feel something awaken in your heart after reading, please share this story via WhatsApp. Maybe you know someone who has been forced to be silent. Maybe they are struggling with distorted memories or simply need a reason to believe that. There are still people in this world who remember, who search, and who refuse to let the truth be buried. Send this story to someone you trust, because who knows, you, or they, will be the first to dare to listen. And when someone listens, the truth will no longer be forgotten.